How did one of the earliest great urban centers of Mesoamerica rise not on a natural hill, but on a plateau reshaped by human hands, lifted above rivers and wetlands to create a new kind of landscape? San Lorenzo rests in the low Gulf Coast region of southern Mexico, where rivers curve slowly through broad floodplains. The land is humid and fertile. Seasonal rains swell waterways until they spill across surrounding ground. The soil is rich but unstable. Water defines the rhythm of life here. At first glance, the terrain appears flat. There are no mountains to anchor the horizon, no high ridges breaking the sky. And yet, rising above this low landscape, a broad plateau stretches across the plain. Its surface feels level and expansive, distinct from the natural contours around it. This plateau was not entirely natural. Over generations, earth was moved, reshaped, and elevated. Ravines were filled, slopes were modified, the top was flattened and extended. What remains is a carefully engineered high ground, standing above seasonal floods and commanding wide views of surrounding rivers. San Lorenzo emerged atop this altered landscape as one of the earliest known large centers in the region. Broad plazas spread across the plateau. Mounds rise at measured intervals. Drainage channels cut through earth to guide water away from key areas. The site feels deliberate, its contours shaped by design rather than accident. Water was both opportunity and threat. Nearby rivers offered transportation and connection to distant regions. They carried fertile sediment and linked inland routes to coastal zones. But they also flooded unpredictably. Elevation was protection. San Lorenzo chose to build upward. Stone was scarce in this region, yet large basalt monuments appear across the plateau. Massive blocks were transported from distant highlands and set into place with precision. Their presence hints at long-distance networks and organized movement across challenging terrain. The site flourished early in Mesoamerican history, long before many later stone cities rose. Its scale suggests experimentation with centralized planning and monumental space. No written record explains its foundation. The plateau itself holds the memory of transformation. And so the question settles over this elevated ground. Why did one of the region's earliest urban centers reshape the earth so dramatically to build here? To understand how San Lorenzo functioned, the rivers surrounding it must be seen as part of the city's design. The Coatzacoalcos River system winds through this region, creating a network of waterways that shift with the seasons. During heavy rains, channels swell and floodplains expand. In drier months, exposed banks reveal firm ground and travel routes. San Lorenzo stood within this moving landscape, but slightly above it. The artificially raised plateau provided stability in a place where stability was rare. From its height, surrounding rivers could be observed. Canoe traffic likely moved along these waterways, linking distant communities across the Gulf Coast and beyond. The plateau was not isolated, it was connected through water. Across its surface, space was carefully arranged. Broad, open areas suggest plazas for gathering. Mounds rise at key points, forming a planned layout rather than scattered construction. Deep-cut drainage channels run through the plateau, carved directly into earth to manage heavy rainfall. These channels demonstrate early hydraulic engineering, guiding water safely away from important areas. The scale of modification is striking. Entire sections of ground were reshaped to create smooth, level surfaces. Natural ridges were cut down. Low areas were filled. The plateau became architecture. Basalt monuments add another dimension to the site. Massive stone heads and sculpted blocks were transported from distant sources, sometimes more than 50 miles away. Moving such weight through swampy lowlands required coordination and long-term planning. These monuments were integrated into the plateau's layout, reinforcing its central spaces. Yet San Lorenzo does not appear chaotic. Structures follow orientation patterns. Open spaces remain clear between raised areas. The layout feels measured and repeated. The site likely functioned as a regional center, its elevation symbolic as well as practical. By rising above floodwaters, it also rose above surrounding settlements. But this raises deeper questions. How did such large-scale coordination emerge so early? What sustained the labor required to reshape an entire plateau? The earth records the engineering, but it does not explain the beginning. As San Lorenzo matured, the plateau became increasingly structured. What began as reshaped ground evolved into a carefully organized landscape. Platforms were layered over earlier surfaces, mounds were expanded and redefined, drainage channels were maintained and extended. The site did not grow outward without order, it deepened through continuity. Walking across the plateau today, the ground appears gently rolling. Subtle rises mark buried foundations. Broad clearings suggest former plazas. From above, patterns emerge, rectangular arrangements, aligned mounds, and consistent spacing between elevated zones. The entire summit reads as a planned environment rather than a natural hilltop. One of the most distinctive features of San Lorenzo lies in its stone monuments. Colossal basalt heads, carved with individual detail, once stood at prominent locations across the plateau. These were not placed randomly. Their positions reinforce major axes and focal points within the layout. The weight and craftsmanship of these monuments suggests centralized effort, yet the site itself remains the dominant presence. Stone altars and carved blocks also appear across the plateau, some reused in later construction phases. This reuse hints at shifting meanings over time. Earlier monuments were repositioned, buried, or reworked. The landscape itself absorbed these changes, preserving earlier phases beneath newer layers of earth. Despite its scale, San Lorenzo does not show signs of dense urban crowding. Residential zones likely extended beyond the plateau into surrounding lowlands. The elevated core appears designed for coordination, ceremony, and regional interaction rather than everyday habitation. Subtle changes begin to appear in later construction. Some monuments were intentionally broken or buried. Certain drainage channels show reduced maintenance. Architectural alignments shift slightly. These signs are not dramatic, but they suggest transition. The plateau remained elevated, but its rhythm was changing. Something altered the balance between river and raised ground, between monument and maintenance. And the earliest great center of the region began to move toward uncertainty. In its later centuries, San Lorenzo began to change in ways that were steady rather than sudden. There is no clear sign of widespread destruction across the entire plateau. Instead, the signs appear in fragments. Some monuments were deliberately buried. Others were broken and repositioned. Certain drainage channels show signs of neglect. The careful maintenance that once shaped the summit grew uneven. In a floodplain environment, even small lapses carried weight. Rivers may have shifted their courses, altering transportation routes that once linked the plateau to distant regions. Changes in rainfall patterns could have affected agriculture in surrounding lowlands. If nearby communities moved or reorganized, the elevated center would have felt the shift. San Lorenzo depended on continuity. Without regular reinforcement, earthen slopes softened under rain. Without clearing, vegetation spread across surfaces. Without repair, channels filled with sediment. The plateau remained physically elevated, but its active use appears to have declined. Regional dynamics also changed. Other centers emerged elsewhere in Mesoamerica. Networks of exchange and influence likely redirected. What had once been a dominant hub may have gradually become one node among many. The decline does not appear violent, it appears gradual. Over time, the plateau blended more fully into its surroundings. Monuments remained, but some were partially buried. Earth reshaped edges. Grass and trees took root in shallow depressions. The engineered summit slowly returned toward natural form. Today, San Lorenzo still rises above the floodplain, its altered contours visible from a distance. The plateau remains broad and deliberate. Basalt monuments stand as reminders of long-distance movement and coordinated effort. Drainage channels cut through soil, evidence of early hydraulic understanding. And so the question returns, why did one of the earliest urban centers of Mesoamerica invest such immense labor in reshaping an entire plateau, and why did its influence eventually fade? The remains suggest answers rooted in water control, elevation, and early regional integration. They also reveal how fragile even elevated ground can be when renewal slows. San Lorenzo endures as a landscape transformed, where Earth itself became the foundation of one of the region's first great cities. If this exploration of San Lorenzo has stayed with you, you may wish to continue uncovering these early ancient landscapes with us. And what do you think made elevating an entire plateau worth the effort?